My hero was my father. My father was the coolest dude I ever met. He wasn't an educated man, but when he died, his mind was still like a child's mind. And he couldn't take in enough information. It was just amazing to be around my dad. And unfortunately, death is a part of the journey of life. And when I talked to my dad, we would be connected. If I was with him, we would be engaged. And if I was on the phone with him, we would be engaged. But when we were apart, we were busy doing our lives. And when my father passed away, it was like a starburst. In some ways, it was the greatest day of our lives. Because when that star burst, my father is with me every minute of every day. I feel him all the time. I'm bathed in his love and his youthful wonder for life. And so, while that may sound a little maudlin, it's just a gift that keeps on giving. So the person that inspires me the most is my dad. Yes?
How do you sort of deal with the practice of their game? How do both your players deal with if they're not playing well, they're getting frustrated, and the tournament is playing worse?
Right. That's a phenomenal question. When we're playing poorly, or when we perceive we're playing poorly, we press. And invariably it makes us play worse. So the question is, how do I help them deal with that? Well, the first thing that I do is I try to help them focus on mechanical things to take their attention away from outcomes. One of the first things we focus on is footwork. You know, you're just not moving well, which is invariably what happens when you're pressing. You're not moving well. I want you to go on the court, and I want you to focus on your movement. I really want you to start moving like a dancer out there. Let's really improve the movement. And by taking their focus off of the scoreboard, which is what we get focused on, and focusing on something really tangible, then you see them starting to perform better. And so I'm a big believer in getting to focus on very basic, simple things in the heat of play that take your attention off of the scoreboard. The only thing I cannot accept is when a person stops trying. That absolutely blows my mind. How can you not try? I mean, there are kids in wheelchairs that would give anything to be in your shoes, and you stop trying. Unacceptable. At least go out there and try. And if you can get people understanding that, then they generally play better. And sometimes they just get beaten. Not the worst thing in the world. Yes?
Yeah, you talked a lot about your team and how you're like a group and you definitely have a sense of family. And I was just wondering if you do anything like extracurricular or outside of practice that helps to promote that feeling.
Yeah, the question is, how do you get a group of people feeling like a team? The more things we can do away from the courts, the better. So we go play miniature golf, go to the batting cage. The kids will come over for dinner, you know, often. Super Bowl Sunday, you know, that sort of thing. I make it a point to eat with everybody on the team once a week. In groups of 5 or 6. And we don't talk about squash. What's happening in your life, you know, what's going on. Just start to feel this kindredness between each other. And I find that one of the positive outcomes of that is people play better, but that's not the reason you do it. It's just you develop this wonderful relationship. And when you look back 20 years after your college experience, you're not going to remember the score in the Yale match, but you'll remember the van ride when you had a teammate that had the flu or whatever. So all of this camaraderie is really what the journey is all about. Yes?
Have you ever had a setback that kind of made you feel like you couldn't go on? And if you have, then do you have any advice for anybody who might have that situation?
If I ever had a setback that told me that I couldn't go on. Jim is smiling now. I've had many. More than I had a right to. But I will tell you a heartfelt truth. We have highway signs in Hartford that say we're the winningest team in history. And we have banners on the ceilings and that sort of thing. But the biggest mistake I made in my life was I focused too much on my work and not enough on my family. And I have a 34-year-old son that's a heroin addict. And he has had 17 years of heroin addiction. And he is now in a rehab program in Vermont, and God willing, maybe we'll come out of this. That was a pretty major setback. Because what it made me realize was that if I had been there for him at every fork in the road, maybe he would have made better choices. Maybe he wouldn't have. But at least I would have been able to look in the mirror and say I did the best I could. And that was one of the things that made me realize you better be fully engaged every minute of every day for everyone that's counting on you. So that was my biggest setback. Heavy. Ooh.
How do you prepare for a game when you know that you're coming off of like such a huge winning streak? Do you sometimes expect that you're going to win?
It's fun. That's a good question. Do we expect that we're going to win? I can honestly tell you that it never occurs to us that we're going to lose. No, that sounds silly, but when we were playing in the national finals 2 years ago, our #1 player was down 5-0 in the 5th game. And our assistant coach came up to him and he said, "Do you think he can do it?" It had never occurred to me that he wouldn't. Now, he might have lost that day. Maybe he should have lost that day. And if he had at that moment, we would have dealt with that reality. But until the last breath is squeezed out of the body, it just never occurs to us that we're going to lose. Well, you guys were great sports, and most of you stayed awake, although I lost you in the first minute. That was see you in the knee drop.
Coach, can I just ask you just two final questions before we let you go? And we're going to have a book signing up in the Gahagan room. But my two questions were these. First of all, just how influential was your time at West Point? And what did you learn about coaching and about the incredible young men and women who were at West Point, and how has that affected your career? And then the second question I would love you to address is that one of the things that you've done so beautifully at Trinity is you've had an incredible diversity of players from international destinations and all across the United States. And I'm just interested in how you have built team through the international diversity and the national diversity, and how you've dealt with issues of intolerance and bigotry that you and your team have actually experienced on court during national competitions that has been, quite frankly, completely over the top. And it was a great challenge, I think, to your coaching and to your team. So just those two questions, and then we'll head upstairs.
Well, my experience at West Point was profound in that that was my first job as a head coach. And one of the things that I came away with at West Point that we've tried to instill in our players now is the concept of seniority. I'm a big fan of seniority. I like to have the upperclassmen, that could be my mother, 58 years old and she still calls me every night. I learned the importance of seniority, and I really try to let the captains and the upperclassmen run the program. And even if the #1 player on the team is a freshman, he's still a freshman. So he plays #1 against Princeton, but when we're cleaning up after practice, he's throwing away the garbage and throwing away the balls. And when we go to the cafeteria, he's cleaning up the trays and that sort of thing. Because he knows that he's a part of a team. It's not just about him. And then he also knows that 4 years from now, he's going to be running the team as a captain or at least as a senior. So I learned the value of seniority and a rite of passage. And it doesn't matter how talented you are, you're still only a small part of the big wheel, and you have to earn your keep, and you have to earn your stripes, so to speak, before you can be treated with the respect that an upperclassman would be treated with. So that was one of the biggest lessons I took away from West Point. Working with cadets was an amazing experience. They're just such a disciplined and determined group of people. And I could tell you a million West Point stories, but I won't. But there was one story that sort of symbolized West Point athletics to me. One night at Nike Stadium, we scrimmaged against the University of North Carolina in lacrosse. And UNC was very, very good. And also, under the lights, everything looked so much faster. And so I went up to watch the game. And I'll never forget, it was a scrimmage. It was a 3-hour-long scrimmage. And the cadets did what is called an Indian run. You know what an Indian run is? So the Indian run is when you're running in a circle, and the last person in the line sprints to the front. And this just keeps going on. Well, the cadets did an Indian run for 3 hours around the field. And all substitutions came in and out of that Indian run. And that's when I realized that, oh my gosh, these kids are really focused. I asked the coach about it afterwards. And I said, why did you do that to them? And he said that was their idea. That was pretty impressive. In terms of dealing with the diversity challenge that we face at Trinity, we have an incredibly diverse group of students. And when we get in a van to drive somewhere for a match, you can't imagine the conversations. Because we've got a young person sitting in the van talking about the values of democracy. And then you've got another person there from Egypt, where they have a king. Or there's somebody in there from Zimbabwe, which is a country that might not exist in a couple of years, based on where it's going now. We brought in a young man from South Africa, Loa Katsir. And he was the first one we brought in from South Africa. And the week before he arrived, I got a call from one of the administrators saying, Coach, is this young person white or black? It never occurred to me to ask. Everyone is the same. She said, you know, there's apartheid there. I said, what are we dealing with here? Are we going to have a problem here? Loa Katsir arrives that day, and he's this big, chubby white guy from Bloemfontein, South Africa. And we go down that night to play at the Aquamas Club in Rye, New York. And I don't know Loa at all. And he gets on the court, and he plays against a young man from Zambia who's black. And I'm thinking, ooh, we're going to find out the first day how Loa feels about apartheid. And those two guys went after each other for about an hour and a half, drenched in perspiration, and when the match was over, they walked across the court and gave each other a big hug. And I knew that, you know what, we're all in this game together. And to have a guy from India practicing on the court with a guy from Pakistan, and they're just brothers, it's a beautiful thing. So internally, we've been able to deal with it well. We don't get treated very well all the time when we're on the road. And that's been a real challenge. And I prepare the boys for that. So when we went up to Harvard a few years ago, some of the things that we said to the boys were just unforgivable. They were so horrifying that I wouldn't repeat them now. And our guys basically smiled and said, thank you very much. And we got off the course and we drove back to Hartford, and they were pretty upset. The most challenging thing I've ever experienced was 9/11. Because when you look at our squash team, they look like the images you were seeing on the television at 9/11. And I'll never forget our president standing out on the end of the